Her book is out, and Valerie Jarrett does not hold back, revealing to readers how finding her voice set her off on an extraordinary journey.
On the South Side, she's Valerie June Bowman. But to America, she's Valerie Jarrett. Advisor, advocate for social justice, and now author. Empowering the next group of change makers and barrier breakers to find their voice.
Ordinary people can do extraordinary things.
Please welcome Chicago's own Valerie Jarrett.
Me so proud. Look at y'all. You look great.
Aren't they amazing?
They're amazing.
Yeah, well, so are you.
Well, hello, Val.
Hi.
How are you?
The question is, how are you? You got to be riding on cloud 9. The book is out.
It's done.
It's done. I know.
It's
the last
done.
time we were together, you were still making the edits. It's a process.
It is more than an ocean, but I'm so glad I did it because I did it for you all. That's the reason why I did it.
Yeah, and how does it? You've been on the tour. I've been seeing you everywhere.
I just started this week. It has been a bit of a whirlwind, but I started in New York, Philadelphia, but you know there's no place like home.
There is no place like home.
Could not wait to get here with all of you.
Well, let's talk about it.
All right.
Beautiful cover.
Thank you.
How tough was that to pick out the cover? Was that a process?
We spent a little time, I'll be honest with you. We had some choices, but I wanted the casual look.
Yeah, it works. It works. Let's talk about you and this book. Little Valerie Bowman.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness. Born in Iran, speaking Farsi, riding camels, having this fabulous life. A lot different than the South Side of Chicago.
A little different indeed. But there's still no place like home.
Yeah.
It was quite an adventure I was on.
Right. What was the difference? What are your fondest memories from? You have really traveled the world at such a young, early age. I know you said part of it was influenced by your parents who would recount these stories to you, but you still have some very vivid memories.
Well, I do. And my fondest memories of Iran were that it was just wonderful. We lived on a hospital compound. My father went there because he couldn't get a job in the United States he wanted to be a professor at a medical center, and he couldn't get a job equivalent to his white counterparts. Yeah. And so he and my mom, they were these adventuresome spirits, and they said, well, let's look outside of the United States. And back then, the United States had much better diplomatic relations with Iran, obviously, than they do today. And so he found a job starting a new hospital, the Namazi Hospital in Shiraz, Iran. I was the second baby born in the hospital. They practiced on some other child before I got there. Thank goodness.
They did something right.
And then I came along, and it was fascinating because from there he went to London, and so we lived there for a year. Yeah. And then he got recruited to come here to University of Chicago. So he used to always say to me that sometimes the shortest distance to where you want to go, you got to be willing to take the longest way around. You got
to be able to pivot. Which is a recurring theme throughout the book. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but I want to kind of stay in this order. So you're back home in Chicago with pudding. Tell us about pudding.
Well, in part, I dedicated the book to my grandmother, Puddin'. My father named her that because she was so sweet. Yeah. And she was really the matriarch of our family. She was my mother's mother, and we lived just a block away from her when we moved back here. And my mother's sister lived in the same building as she did. And everything really revolved around Puddin's household. If somebody was late coming home from work, drop the kid off at Puddin'. If you were sick and couldn't go to school, go to Puddin'. If you wanted unconditional love, go to Puddin'.
Right, and Puddin' is slang for pudding. Just in case y'all don't know, but pudding is a very affectionate term of endearment in our community, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. She was a sweetheart.
Yeah, and your mother, Barbara, 90 years old, right?
90 years old, still works full time.
Still working, still cooking.
Can you believe that? I know, listen to them. Oh my goodness, that's what I say. Still driving.
Still driving. Still cooking those fabulous Sunday dinners that you write about in the book.
Make Sunday dinner every single Sunday.
And still
for not just for like herself, but for 20 people.
Every Sunday?
Yes, that's our relatives, 20 on up, come over every single Sunday. She starts cooking it like the Sunday before, thinking about it in her head, and what am I gonna have? And so she's really a force in nature. I'm so proud of her. Yeah, and she really raised you in a very specific way. One time you read about in the book that, I'm gonna run away. She said, okay, I'm gonna help you pack. Can you believe she said that to me? She said, I believe that. You forgot your undershirts. Let's get those in there too. And then I'm like, she's really gonna let me go. And I was only like 6, and I packed my bag, and of course I went right around the corner to Puddin's house. And Puddin gave me like Ritz crackers and cheese, my favorite thing. And then Maybe 2 hours later, in comes my mom. She doesn't say a word. She just takes my hand and takes me back home. And I was relieved because I thought, well, am I going to be living here permanently? She going to come get me? What's going on here?
Yeah, that's like a tough love, huh? That's what they call
love.
it. And we can't forget about your father and the importance of male figures in your life. Talk about him.
Well, my dad was just amazing. He was one of these people who sees the glass half full, and my mother was the opposite, half empty. And I'm much more like he is. I always assume if you work hard, things are going to work out. Yeah. And my mother's like, prepare for the worst. And he just loved me unconditionally. He loved my daughter who's here today unconditionally. I don't know what we would have done without him.
I know, and that's who I was going to next, because Laura is all throughout the book. And who is she more like, your mom or your dad? She's in the audience. Hi, Laura.
She's in the audience. Hi, sweetheart.
Hi. She's different than you, right? You write about that in the book.
She's far better than I am. I raised her aspirationally. She had her voice long before I did. She's confident. She's now a correspondent for CNN covering the Justice Beat. I'm so proud of her. Yeah, she's amazing. And she was always so much more outgoing. As you know, I was very shy, painfully shy. I couldn't have spoken in front of 10 people when I was your age. These seniors in high school are here today. And she would talk to people at 3. She'd go in the elevator. Hi, I'm Laura Jarrett. What's your name? And I would go, whose child are you? Yeah. So much more outgoing than I was.
Right. And Laura, you have to just be so proud of your mom. What do you think about the book?
I'm thrilled for her. I'm thrilled for this book. She worked so hard on this book, you guys. You don't know. I watched her slave away on it. And I always knew that she had a strong voice in our household. That was clear. But I'm just so happy that we get to share this with the rest of the world and everyone else gets to experience her voice.
Let's talk about your friendship with Mr. Obama. And you guys had a very personal, intimate, emotional moment that you actually write about in the book that nobody knew. And it was when he was in the Senate run. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the one that I remember the most was election night. Election night when here in Grant Park, and it was such a beautiful night, and a million people came out, and I waited for him backstage. Because I found out he'd won on my way to Grant Park, so I wasn't with him when the news came across. And so I was waiting backstage, and I was trying to think, what could I say to express how I feel? And I couldn't think of a word to say. And then he started walking towards me, and he didn't say anything either. And we just gave each other a hug and never said a word. And I think I really couldn't sum up how proud I was of him at that very moment. He'd worked so hard for it, to earn the trust and the respect of the American people, and to see he and Michelle Obama, who I met when she was Michelle Robinson.
Yes.
And how far they had come. Oh, it was a beautiful night.
Well, you talk a lot about that in the book, how you were like the big sister to them, and you were so impressed with Mrs. Obama initially.
Yes,
and when
I
you
was.
offered her that job, she said, oh, I need to talk to my fiance. I thought that was one of the funniest lines in the book. And you said in the book, you go, who the hell does to do that? Like, she's deciding her life. But you then learned the dynamic between the two of them and how impressed you were with them.
I was so impressed. When I offered her a job on the spot, she's like, let me think about it. And then I called her a few days later, and she's like, well, my fiance's not so sure it's a great idea. And I'm like, well, psh. And she said, would you have dinner with us? And so I had dinner, and I will tell you, that night, I still remember it so vividly, and it was 28 years ago. And you could see the love, you could see, more importantly, the respect back and forth. They listened to one another. And he really wanted to have a sense of me. Who is the person who's going to be looking out for her? And so I assured him I would look out for her, and I have certainly tried to do that.
You have done that
job. And now she looks out for me.
Yeah, and you guys are both on amazing book tours.
Yes.
Both of you have books out right now. And she had this to say about you. Valerie was one of my earliest and best role models for how to be a confident woman, and her mother, and a mother, I should say, in the workforce. She helped me while I was finding my voice, and I'm so proud to see her helping others find and use their own voices. Pretty big compliment, wouldn't you say?
Yes, most indeed. And I will say, having watched her now basically grow up. She was in her 20s when I met her. Now she's not that much older yet. But to find her voice and to speak so confidently and write such a beautiful memoir just makes me really, really proud.
It was really cool to see both of you interviewing her on her book tour.
I've done several now, and I'm doing one more up in Montreal. in May. And yeah, we have the best time. It's just like you and me sitting here talking right now. It's a hoot talking to her.
Will you do something like that? Maybe she gets to interview
Wouldn't
you?
that be something?
That's a good idea.
I love your idea. You tell her that that's a good idea.
Call my friend too. I'd like to consider my friend too now and tell her.
She came on your show in her memoir, the only place in Chicago. She did an interview right here.
She was fantastic, as are you. Let's talk a little bit more about some of these moments in the White House, because it is really interesting how you talk about women having to wait on men sometimes. You would think, even in this day and age, that wouldn't be, but to use their voice. What was going on?
You know what? I think everybody comes to a new job with their past experiences. And I think a lot of the women in the White House had never worked for somebody quite like Barack Obama. And remember, he was raised by a single mom, lived with his grandparents, saw his grandmother work and hit a glass ceiling, married to this dynamic woman, has 2 daughters.
Right.
He wanted to be surrounded by strong women with opinions so that he would make informed decisions. He didn't want an echo chamber. He wanted to talk to people who thought differently than he did. And so he had to encourage them to find their voices and to say, you need to speak up in this White House, because if I make a decision and I haven't heard from you, maybe it's not the right decision.
Right.
And I think we were so lucky that half of the department heads in the White House were headed by women. And we really formed a nice group amongst ourselves. We used to go out to dinner, talk about the guys, talk about whatever, children, all of the things that people do with their girlfriends. And it made me miss the people in the White House more than anything.
Right. I imagine. I feel like we've talked about so much so far, but I have not even asked you, when did you find your voice?
I'll tell you what happened, and I begin my book with this. I was sitting in my office after I had made a 10-year plan coming out of college, and I was going to go right to law school. I was going to come back to Chicago. I was missing it because I was homesick. I was going to
get married.
Figure out, well, I was going to get married.
That was 4 or 5.
I think first I was going to find a good job, which I did.
Right.
Then I was going to get married. Then I was, fall in love, get married, have a baby, and then by 31, I was going to be very happy, 10 years later, right? And I know, it was kind of funny. So I did go to law school. I found a good job. I found a better job. I married the boy next door. What could go wrong with that? Plenty. Had Laura, best thing I ever did in my entire life. She came along just shy of my 29th birthday. And I was sitting in this law firm where everybody thought I had the perfect life. Everybody thought, well, what more could you want than this? And I would sit there and turn away from the door and cry. And Harold Washington, mayor of Chicago, had just been reelected to a 2nd term. And a dear friend of mine said, Valerie, why don't you try something where you'll feel like it's about something bigger than you? And you'll feel like you can give back to the city that you love and take this leap of faith. And I did. And I found advocating for Chicagoans inside of City Hall was so much easier than advocating for private clients at a law firm.
Right.
And that's when I started really, really finding my voice. And then I had a client who encouraged me to ask for promotion. Now, I did not think I should be asking for a promotion. I thought my boss should recognize how talented I was and give it to me, right?
Right.
No, that's not what happens.
No.
Sometimes you have to push yourself, and I didn't want to do it, and she pushed me and pushed me.
She
and
really did.
Finally, just so she would stop talking, I did it. And I thought, let me get this over with. I know he'll say no. And I walked in there, and he said yes. And I realized that if I hadn't done it, it might not have happened. And so I began to realize it's okay to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to march into my general manager's office and find my voice today.
Sorry about that. I'm so sorry. He's going to be mad at me.
Oh, no, he's used to me finding my voice every 6 months. But hey, you know what? You got to keep trying, right?
We've talked about this, yes, indeed.
We have talked about this. How's your voice changed since November 8th, 2016?
Well, it's interesting. When I worked in the White House, Val, we had to work on every single issue that came before his desk as a senior advisor, everything. And after I left the White House, I did some soul searching. And I said, what are the issues that you really care most about, most passionately about? And they're gender equity, because I want all these young women in the audience to have absolutely the same fair shot and even playing field with the guys, right?
Amen to that.
I care about civic engagement, so Michelle Obama and I started an organization called When We All Vote, and there we're dedicated to changing the culture in our country around voting so people appreciate that they have to get involved. It's our democracy. If their voices don't count, somebody else's voice will, right? I care about criminal justice reform. I think our system is inhumane right now, and I want to try to help end gun violence. And you and I did a really special show on gun violence for which we won an Emmy, I might add. And so those are the things that really motivate me. And so I'm really directing my voice to help the next generation get involved civically and fight for the issues, so that when I was a young, single, working mom, I had a lot going for me. I could afford good childcare. I had parents who lived a mile away. My dad took Laura to school every day of her life. They were right there for me, and I still felt like I was holding on by my fingertips. And so I wanted to fight for those working families that are working 2 shifts and they don't have quality childcare, and they're worried about whether they can afford to pay their rent and put bread on the table. And so that's what I really care passionately about.
I love it.
Now we have students from the next generation here in our studio audience, and I know we have some questions. You want to stand up for me? What's your name? What school do you go to?
My name is Yasmin. I go to ITW David Spear Academy.
All right, and you have a question for Miss Valerie Jarrett.
Yes, I do. So I know that you were involved in intergovernmental affairs and public policy or something similar. So my question for you, yeah, public engagement. When and how did you realize that you had an interest in politics?
You know what? I didn't realize it in college at all. I didn't realize it until I had been working for about 6 years, and I was just following this straight line, this plan I told you I made up while I was in college, and I wasn't paying a lot of attention to anything else. And it wasn't until Harold Washington ran for office that I started focusing on city government. I didn't know who my alderman was. I didn't know how many aldermen were even in the city council, the way city government worked. And Harold made me feel that I finally had a mayor who was representing me and my interests, and it made me curious. And that's what really motivated me to start to study city government and understand how it works, so that when I joined city government, I had really a leg up.
All right, we have another student here from David Spear Academy, and what's your question?
My question is, being a woman, how hard did you have to work to be who you are today?
Very, very, very hard. And I think that, you know, look, my mom used to say, when I would come home and I'd say, well, something happened and it wasn't fair. And she'd go, well, who told you life was fair? And she said the best way to be prepared is to be over-prepared. So get in there and work twice as hard. You're going to still need a little bit of luck. There are people who work twice as hard and they still can't get a break. But you want to be prepared, and you want to look for opportunity. And it never comes along at the most convenient times. But when it does, I encourage you to take that leap of faith, just as I did. If I had not left that law firm, and if I had not tried something brand new where I was scared and nervous about the decision, then I wouldn't be here with you today. And I think so oftentimes we just kind of wallow in the familiar and swerve outside that comfort zone. That's where the adventure is. And it takes courage, and it takes willingness to say, I might fail, I might stumble. And that's okay, because you are smart and you can do whatever you want to do, but you got to push yourself.
All right, one more question.
What advice would you give to us teenage girls who are about to begin college?
That's such a good question. I want you to go to college. I want you to take a wide range of classes. Don't just take what you did really well in high school. Try something new. Try something where you think it might be something that you're not good at, because you might find out that you're better at it. I used to be terrified of public speaking, and look at me now, I cannot shut up. Right? So I want you to do that. I want you to try something that you think is terrifying, a class that you in high school shied away from, and take as many different classes. Wouldn't you love to be back in college? Oh my goodness.
I do things so different. I travel.
That is another way of expanding yourself, but this is a chance for you. And the other thing I would say is to make time to build relationships. Some of my best friends are friends that I made back then.
Ryan, what do you have?
Absolutely. On Facebook, Julie Sims has this to say. I grew up here on the city's south side. Are you planning to make this your retirement home permanently?
Ooh.
Well, I'm not quite ready to retire, Julie, so don't put me out to pasture quite yet. But look, Chicago will always be home. I consider it my permanent home now. I still have a place in Washington. Laura moved to Washington. Laura's having a baby. Wherever that baby is where I'm going to be. But we will always come back here.
All right, we got more questions from students here. What's your name? What school do you go to?
My name is Kashay Griffin, and I attend Perspectives Math and Science Academy.
All right, what's your question?
At Perspectives, being a lifelong learner is really important. Can you give any advice on how to remain a lifelong learner to a young woman like me?
Oh, what a lovely question, dear. Absolutely. Be curious. Read, explore, use technology to explore in a way that we couldn't do when I was a child. I used to have to go to the library and look things up. You can just think about something and right there, the answer's in the palm of your hand. And also meet people that aren't from your neighborhood, that are new to you. This is the thing when you all go to college. Make friends with people who are from a different part of the country, a different part of the world, and ask them questions and be curious about their life. And if you keep that curiosity, both intellectual and emotional curiosity, you'll be a lifelong learner.
That's
All
such
right.
good advice.
Very nice. Next question.
My name is Angelique, and I wanted to ask you, how did you respect differences while maintaining your point of view to achieve a common goal?
Oh, wow. That is what we should have more of in Washington, where you can have your core values that you believe in, and those should not waver, but you should learn and be willing to listen. And I think that working in city government here in Chicago actually taught me to be a good listener, because when you're working at local government, you can go to the grocery store, you can take your child to a park, and people come up to you and tell you just what they think. And that's what service is all about. You have to keep that connection with your constituents and remember why you are there. And so I think being open, listening, being willing to be curious and ask questions, and also it's okay to change your mind. Hopefully when you get more and more information, you will make better decisions. And if you think you made a wrong decision, take a hard look at it, figure out why it was wrong, and then improve upon yourself. And I think sometimes we get so wedded to our opinions that we don't want to say, you know what, I actually changed my mind because I learned something.